Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our publishing and coaching services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we're being joined by Kathleen Janus, author of Social Startup Success. Kathleen, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Paul.
Are you ready to get started?
Ready as I'll ever be.
All right. Let me get to our first question here. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
Well, I was just talking with another author who is launching their book in a couple of weeks, and I was giving some advice about different strategies that I used. And I realized in telling him that, my one piece of advice is that every author needs to figure out what is authentic for them. There's a lot of strategies out there. I think there's more tools than ever before that we can use to launch books, whether it's social media or traditional media or word of mouth. And whereas a Facebook Live might be really, really exciting for one person, someone else might not feel comfortable using Facebook in that way. So every author has to figure out what's authentic for them and really be focused.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one of the biggest things is because I don't think not every author out there wants to necessarily get out of the comfort zone. And definitely when you're doing a Facebook Live, that definitely does take you out of your comfort zone a little bit. That's why I always recommend to people, hey, if you don't like video, then at least do audio. Go on a podcast or write a blog or do something at least to help get the word out there, because you do have to get out your comfort zone one way or the other with this.
Absolutely. And all these things are just like muscles. I mean, when I did my first Facebook Live, let me tell you, it's not a comfortable thing. But you learn and you get better. And every time you do it, you improve on your messaging. And ultimately, that's what helps you get your word out there.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, the first time I did a Facebook Live, and I have to think back to this because I only started doing them a year ago. And just to be honest with you, I haven't done too many. But I was actually on the beach. If I remember correctly, I think it was Venice Beach, and I did this 3-minute live video. It was a few months after I left my teaching position to go into publishing, and I was basically just talking about getting out of your comfort zone and facing your fears, because obviously when you leave to build your own company, there's no guarantee of a paycheck. And that's one of the things that I talked about was those fears and overcoming those, because if you are going to do these live videos, you have to really connect with your audience, and the best way to do that is you do have to show that vulnerability. So that's definitely something for authors out there. If you are wanting to do this, you do have to get out of your comfort zone, and you do have to talk about things that you might not necessarily be comfortable with, because that is going to be the best way that you can connect with people, because not everyone wants to hear about all these successes. They want to hear about the struggle and how you overcome it.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more.
Well, what do you feel is the hardest part about getting published?
I think the hardest part is really just getting to your own voice and figuring out what your voice is and what you want to say. I think once you have that voice and who you are and what you want to say, I think the rest falls into place. But one of the things that I did to really figure out my voice was I did a lot of short form writing before I did my book. And so, I put stuff up on Huffington Post. Medium is now such an easy way to get work out there quickly, or even LinkedIn has a publishing arm now where you can put pieces up in front of audiences. It's a way to test out your ideas. It's a way to test out your voice, and it's a way to get you closer to getting a book deal, honestly.
Well, and that's going to connect perfectly into our next question, and that is to please share a marketing strategy that you've used in your book launch that worked well.
For me, I had a little bit of a blitz approach. I didn't take my own advice to be focused. I did a little bit of everything to figure out what worked. So that would be one piece of advice is do a little bit of everything to test out and then run with what's working and leave behind what isn't. For me, the one strategy that really worked was podcasts, actually. I hired one of my research assistants at Stanford for an hourly rate to just go out and pitch as many publishers of podcasts as she could. She pitched 150 podcasts, and I've recorded somewhere between 40 and 50 now. I've lost count, but that's a great way to get in front of your target audience. You can be really targeted about who you're approaching. If you do a keynote in another city, you have to get on a plane, you have to prepare the speech, you have to get up, get dressed. Podcasts are great because you don't even have to shower. You can do them in the comfort of your own home or your office, and really reach a lot of people. So I can't recommend the podcast strategy highly enough.
Yeah, that's one thing I always joke around is like, you can do the podcast in your jammies.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I'd like to revisit a couple of your strategies that you mentioned. And I know just before we got into the marketing question, you talked about writing on Medium and also on HuffPost. Now, with Huffington Post, what was your strategy to do that article for them?
So Huffington Post in particular used to have a much more open submissions forum. They now are much more closed. My strategy with trying to do short form blogging has been to reach out to connect with people that I can get to through my own contacts. LinkedIn is a great strategy for trying to reach people. So you can type Huffington Post into your LinkedIn search box there and find out everybody you know who works for Huffington Post, and that's a great way to get to them. And that's been a really successful strategy that I've used to get published in the Harvard Business Review. It's how I got published in Fast Company. So really tapping into your contacts as much as you can, and don't be afraid to ask. I mean, this is when you come out with a book. Not everybody has 14 books like you, Paul, but for me, it was just my one and only shot. And people want to help you, and they want to see you succeed, and so give them that opportunity to help you.
And did you go through a traditional publisher, or did you publish the book yourself?
I did go through a traditional publisher, which for me was the right decision. I was still trying to reach a broader audience, and the traditional publisher does a lot behind the scenes that I think people don't appreciate, recording the audiobook and doing some of that in-house publicity and marketing and making sure that they're selling international rights for you. So all that has been really successful in my case, but certainly self-publishing is another route for the right book.
And if you don't mind me asking, which traditional publisher did you go through?
I went with Da Capo Press, which is an imprint of Perseus and now Hachette Book Group.
Yeah, because one of the funny thing is with going traditional publishing is that most of those companies, they still expect you to do the lion's share of the marketing.
Yeah, that's true, and in my case, that was true as well. But I think, unless you are one of these lucky people to get a huge book advance, I've even had friends who have been in that position. It can be nice to do it all yourself because then you do it right, and you learn from it, and so I don't think it's such a bad thing.
Well, and I love your strategy about the different podcasts. I mean, that's such a great idea to go to 150 different podcasts, and out of those, you still got on the 40 to 50 of them, which is a great number because that's definitely a huge outreach.
Absolutely. I mean, people are looking for content all the time. When you have a new book, you have something new to say about a subject area that can be really helpful to reaching into someone's audience. And so, authors have to remember that they're providing a service too, that this is something that is actually helping podcasters or media. And so, own it. Don't sell yourself short.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the one strategies that if I was starting out again, that's the one main strategy I would implement is to get on as many podcasts as possible, because I started going on podcasts probably about a year in. So started about 2016. I've gone probably about 7 or 8 of them. Not a huge amount, but just going back now and realizing, especially having my own podcast, is the realization that this is the one strategy that any new author out there can do to get very quick marketing done at a zero cost. The only cost you're looking at is your time. So it's definitely one of the best strategies that you can do starting out is to get on as many of these podcasts as possible.
Yep. And, the worst thing someone can say is no.
Yep.
And the reality is, you don't know. I have no way of telling when I reach out to a podcast how many listeners they have. Sometimes you might be reaching 6 people, other times you might be reaching 600. But because it's such a quick and easy way to get your ideas out there, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. It's worth the investment in time for me, even if I'm just reaching 6 people.
Well, and a nice thing too is if someone does a Google search with their name on it, that's typically one of the first things that comes up. Your website will come up, your books will most likely come up, but then all the different podcasts that you're on, most of those are going to come up in the search engine. So it's just another great way to have that additional content.
Yeah, absolutely.
One other area I'd like to dive into before we leave our marketing question is the publishing arm of LinkedIn. That's actually something I've heard about vaguely, but something I really haven't pursued myself. How does that work?
So LinkedIn has a place on the site where you can actually publish posts, and it's a great way to boost your professional profile because it's what comes up when you search for LinkedIn are things that you've written about, ideas that you have to contribute to the world, and it's really part of your story and your professional resume. And then they do a good job on their end of using their algorithm to get it to people who might be interested. So it will show up in people's feeds as well. So in a way, it's built-in marketing using the LinkedIn brand.
So were you using content for your book for these posts, or what was your strategy when you were creating these?
For me, I had a whole list of podcasts that I wanted to do, of blogs that I wanted to write, and I just made my way through them. I got on as many publications as I could, and sometimes, for me, LinkedIn and others like that Medium have been a great way to get out content that maybe a traditional publisher wouldn't take, but I think still has a great potential to get out there, and it's easy and quick to put up there.
Well, thank you for sharing that. You had a lot of great concepts, so I definitely had to take a little deeper dive into those, and those are all great ideas. We've done posts, Medium, LinkedIn, and going on podcasts. It is such great advice for our listeners.
Thanks. And I also have all of my best book tips on a blog post that I wrote that I'm happy to share, and maybe we can put in the show notes on Medium. And it's called How to Launch a Book, All the Best Tips I Wish I Had When I Launched Social Startup Success.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about your favorite book. So what is your favorite book, and what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
So most recently, I read this year Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson, which is a wonderful book about his work as a civil rights lawyer representing death penalty cases. And, for me, it has this message of how all of us who care about making a difference in the world must be proximate to the people we are trying to help if we want to make an impact. And so this idea of proximity is one that's really stuck with me in thinking about how I can make a difference and how I can best serve my community.
And for a final question, what is your favorite quote and why?
I am a huge fan of the Margaret Mead quote, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." I really believe that we all have the potential to make a difference, and that we all have the duty and obligation to do our part. So that's a quote that I live by.
It's a great quote. Well, Kathleen, I want to thank you for being a guest on the show. What is the best way for people to find you online?
You can find me online on my website at Kathleen Janus, JANUS.com. And I'm also on Twitter and Facebook regularly.
Well, Kathleen, thank you once again for being a guest on the show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how to get your book published with a proven system that works, grab a free copy of my book at getpublishedpodcast.com.